Okay, we'll get started on our next lecture, which will encompass first, we'll start on conformity and then we'll talk about obedience. So, let's go ahead and start with a video, and then we'll ask a couple questions.
Gentlemen in the elevator now. Here's a candid star. These folks who are entering, the man with the white shirt, the lady with the trench coat, and subsequently one other member of our staff, will face the rear. And you'll see how this man in the trench coat tries to maintain his individuality. But little by little, watch, but he's really making an excuse for turning just a little bit more to the wall. Now we're trying once again. Here's the candid subject. Here comes the candid camera staff, three of them at least. And this man has apparently been fella with his hat on in the elevator. First, he makes a full turn to the rear, and Charlie closes the door. A moment later, we'll open the door. Everybody's changed positions. See if we can use pressure for some good. Now, in a moment, on Charlie's signal, everybody turns forward. Notice they take off their hats. And now, do you think we could reverse the procedure? Watch.
Okay, so just a couple questions, and this might seem ridiculous, but literally, what would you do in this situation? What would you think you would do? That's a more accurate question. Would you just face forward like you would normally do on an elevator? Or would you turn as everybody else does? Or does it depend how many other people are turning? And we may not truly know what we would do. And again, this is hilarious. And it's from a 1960s episode of Candid Camera. And it seems ridiculous, but the pressure is real. Because when the others are facing backwards, suddenly facing forward seems wrong, even though that is the social norm. And so the group kind of creates an expectation without actually saying anything. So, what do you think makes it uncomfortable to be the only person facing forward? Yes, I know that's rhetorical, but maybe it's standing out. For me, it would be like, I am the only one doing this. Why am I the only one doing this? Maybe you feel like you're being watched. Like, what am I doing wrong? And I don't want to look like I'm the one that's doing something weird and I'm uncertain about what's happening. Now, the thing here is, and again, nobody said a word in this video. And in a situation like this or others, nobody has to tell us to follow a rule or a norm or do anything, but we can still feel pressure. And so this is the phenomena we're going to talk about today, and it's conformity. So, conformity is a change in behavior or a belief in response to a real or imagined group pressure. And again, nobody's telling you to do anything. And this pressure, it could be explicit, it could be subtle. It doesn't even have to be there, but you could think that it's there. For example, even in the elevator, there's really no it's imagined pressure. Nobody's saying to turn around, but the group behavior itself is the pressure. Okay, so there's a couple of different things here that we're going to go over, and that as to why we might conform, and that we think the group is right. Again, that maybe there's something I don't know, or maybe I'm the one that's wrong, or we want to be accepted by the group. I don't want to be the one that stands out. I don't want to be rejected. Okay, a couple of quick examples. Okay, in a restaurant. Maybe like you don't know whether you're supposed to seat yourself or not. It looks like a place where a host might seat you, but you're not sure. And so maybe you wait for a few minutes to see if other people come in and are they hanging around the front or are they seating themselves and you just follow suit. With clothes, you kind of know what you want to wear because everybody else is dressed in a specific way. What type of brands are you wearing? You don't want to stand out. The same outcome of all both of these is conformity. Nobody's telling you what to do, but we're trying to fit in. But the psychological reason is different in that with that first one, the restaurant one, again, there's something that we don't know. We don't know whether we're supposed to be seated or not. Somebody else might know. And the second one, we want a group to accept us, and so we might dress in a specific way. So again, here's the thing. We have to break down the human behavior underneath all of this. And to understand conformity, we have to ask why the person followed the group. So, okay, here we go. What happens when we really don't know the answer? So, let's set this up here. Okay, you imagine you're sitting in a completely dark room. There's a tiny point of light that appears on the far wall. And your task is to estimate how far the light moves from side to side. Is it moving 5 inches, 10 inches, 20 inches? But here's the problem. The light isn't actually moving. So here's the thing is that this was a study that was conducted by Sharif in 1936. Is the autokinetic study. And here's what happened. Um, and I'll just walk through this really quickly. Sorry, I have my notes on the wrong page. That's my fault. So, this is going to be called what's called the autokinetic effect, and that um, when light appears to move, there's tiny involuntary eye movements, but no reference point. And so you don't necessarily know the right answer. And so it's really ambiguous, is really what's happening here. But the light doesn't move. And so people develop their own estimates. Okay, so somebody might perceive it's 5 inches, 10 inches. Might say, like, no, it's not moving at all. And so here's the thing. In Sharif's study, he has several different participants answering that question. And what he found was that when participants just did the study alone, they did develop their own estimates. But when they did it in groups, again, like you can see in this wonderful drawing, they heard each other's estimates as to how far the light moved. And over time, what happens is that the estimates converged. And so the group developed a shared norm for how far the light, quote unquote, actually moved. And they don't necessarily know that they're conforming. And they might actually think that their judgment is accurate as time's going on. And so this is what we call informational influence, is that there's something that's ambiguous or uncertain, and that you can't really tell because again, this is the autokinetic effect. You can't really tell if or how far that light's moving. And so again, you make a general guess. And so, but you're not sure. And so you might refer to others because maybe they actually know. And so that does lead to internalization, and you kind of just accept what the group is saying, but you're not pretending. Okay, just another example of this, like a new workplace or the first day somewhere, or you're traveling in an unfamiliar culture. We look to see what everybody else is doing. And we kind of conform to what they are doing. We don't have to necessarily like consciously independently learn every social rule. We just start to use these social cues and shortcuts to conform to that behavior. And we use other people's behavior as information. Okay, so Sharif, yep, discovered that again, once the group creates a norm, the people who created it, they don't have to stick around. So this is kind of interesting. In follow-up research, the original group members were gradually replaced with new people. So they just slowly replaced people. People just, yeah, were replaced. So when one person would leave, a new person would enter, so on and so forth. And then eventually no original members remained. But here's the thing is the group's norms continued. So that estimate continued as it was. And that this is just things how this is just how we do things here. And so this gets into kind of like, okay, how can a rule survive when nobody who created the rule is still there? Now, this gets into like traditions. So the reason why newcomers do observe existing members before they leave, they assume those existing members know how to do things or what is right or what is normal, and so they adopt that behavior. Then they become the people that newcomers copy. And then we go from, I mean, basically generation to generation to generation. And this is how groups can transmit norms without anybody explicitly teaching them or passing it along. Okay, you go to a new place of work, you ask, why do we do it that way? Well, I don't know. That's how we've just always done it. And you're going to hear that. I'm sure you've heard that. Okay, here's another example. And again, this is like, why are we doing this, guys? Okay, octopus tossing. Yes, the Detroit Red Wings. Their fans will toss octopi onto the ice. I ran into this and I'm like, why would you do this? And so if I was to become a Red Wing fan, I would ask, why on God's green earth are we tossing octopi onto the ice? And it is a tradition that has been handed down from generation to generation since 1952. They've thrown octopi, I'm not sure, apologies, onto the ice during playoff games. The eight legs do symbolize the eight wins that are needed for the Stanley Cup at the time in 1952, and the tradition persists despite the format change. They still do it. It's been handed down. Okay, and so you could think about sports teams and traditions that you might be like, why do we do that? Well, this is just what we do. Families, workplaces, college, cultural traditions, religion. There's no original members that remained, but the group's norms continued because at one point the new members conformed with the old members and handed it down on and on and on. Again, so what happens if the original reason for a norm disappears, but the norm actually remains? Again, the format for the playoffs to get to or win the Stanley Cup is different now, yet they still throw the octopus on the ice. Just a thought as to possibly this is part of what it means to be human and part of a group and the importance of a group and traditions and culture for that matter. So, yes, norms passed down from person to person. Again, they don't require formal rules, can be self-sustaining, and it's really cultural transmission. Okay, so Sharif's participants, we're going back to Sharif, done with the octopus. They faced something that was genuinely uncertain. Again, that light that they could not detect, like actually how much it actually moved. They could reasonably think everyone else knew something they didn't. That actually was very truthful. They did not know. So what happens when the answer is completely obvious? You know what the answer is. And what happens if you know the group's wrong? Okay, this brings us to Solomon Ash. All right, the Solomon Ash, this was in the 1950s. And, okay, First and foremost, which comparison line matches the standard line in that first box? Answer's obvious. If you say anything other than B, I'm just going to say you are wrong. But let's imagine everyone before you gives the same wrong answer. Like 5 people before you say A. What do you do? Okay, so here's Ash's study. And yes, participants believe they're completing just a visual judgment task with the lines. Now, he did have called they're called Confederates. They're called stooges here, but they're Confederates. Confederates are people who are in on the study. They are sorry, Confederate. This is the actual participant. They're in on it. They know they have been told what to say. They are actors. The one person who was the actual participant, the blue guy. Okay, so what they did is that they went through with different cards, and Solomon asked, okay, which line matches line number one? And they did this with a variety of cards over and over and over and again. And they did several normal trials first. It built confidence and routine amongst all of the participants. Then they ran into trials where, like, okay, the Confederates all gave the wrong answer. So somebody said, okay, let's see here. What do we have? Somebody said C, 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 C. Oh my God. What does the actual participant do? Okay, there's not a subtle difference here. It is obvious. That first line does not match C. That participant knows that. Again, this is going to be very uncomfortable. You're going to have to publicly disagree. Everybody's looking at you. You're wondering what's going on. You feel stupid. You stand alone. So, what happens? What happens is that about 75% of people conformed at least once during the trials. About 3 out of 4 people out of all of these different trials provided the incorrect answer at least one time. And about 1 out of 3 of the responses on critical trials matched the group's wrong answers. So out of all of the critical trials in which um, the incorrect answer was given, 37% of the time participants conformed. But you do have a quarter of people who never conformed. We do have to focus on that as well. We have 25% of people who said, no, screw that, you guys are wrong. I don't care what this feels like. But so here's the thing is that, yes, there were differences, but you can see that group pressure did matter. And I mean, yes, are you surprised? I'm not sure. I doubt they believed the wrong answer was correct. They knew the answer was wrong, but they went along. And again, we can go back to, like, why would they do that? Again, maybe they didn't want to look stupid. They didn't want the attention. They didn't want to be embarrassed, don't want to conflict, rejection. It's easier to go along and get along and go along, all of that. And again, this is going to be different than the Sharif experiment, because with the Sharif experiment, again, those participants, they literally weren't sure how far that line moved because it really wasn't moving and you couldn't tell. It was ambiguous. So they literally thought everybody else actually could have had the right answer, and that's why they conformed. In this study, though, the participants knew that they were right and the group was wrong, yet they still conformed. So this is what we call normative social influence. We know we're right, but we conform because we want to be accepted, avoid rejection, fit in, and not stand out. Even when we privately believe the group is wrong. So with Sharifs, again, there's the thought that okay, these other people might be right, and we internalize that and go along with that. With the normative social influence, we know that we are correct, and it's merely compliance. We're going along to get along, even though we do not believe that. The public behavior changes, but the private belief might not. Again, here's a good example in regard to a movie. Yeah, oh, you watch it and you're like, oh my God, that was horrible. Then you go out with friends and they're like, yeah, that was awesome. And you're like, yeah, that was pretty good. And you're like, oh my God, that was the worst thing I've ever seen. So yeah, out in public, you're like, yeah, that was great. At home, you're like, no, that was god awful. So another example, group wants to go to a restaurant that you don't, and you don't want it, you don't like it, but you're like, yep, whatever sounds good. I'll stomach it, whatever. You don't want to go. At a meeting, everybody agrees with a bad idea, even though you have concerns, and you just stay quiet. And again, so it's not necessarily dramatic. You might make tiny social adjustments, again, just to fit in. I don't think you're right, but I don't want to be the one saying it. I don't want to say it out loud. So this does raise an important question. Why does standing apart from a group feel so uncomfortable in the first place? And that is where we're going to stop this. And we will restart in just a few minutes. If you would like to come back and continue on with this lecture.